Welcome back to Family Secrets Unveiled. Tonight, we delve into a truth so chilling, so fundamentally impossible, that it challenges the very fabric of memory and identity. It is a story not about what was lost, but about what was systematically erased. Imagine waking up one day, not to the familiar comfort of your life, but to a vast, echoing void where your most cherished memory should be. This is the nightmare that consumed Eleanor Vance, a woman who, at 42, thought she had weathered the storms of life and found her anchor. Eleanor wasn't a celebrity or an heiress. She was an archivist at the New York Public Library, a meticulous, grounded soul whose life was built on verifiable facts and historical records. Her world was paper, ink, and truth. That's why what happened next shattered her existence with such devastating force. Eleanor lived in a quiet brownstone in Brooklyn with a man named Thomas. Thomas, a soft-spoken landscape architect with a perpetually kind smile and eyes the color of moss, was the center of her universe. They had a life that felt like it had been carved out of time itself: lazy Sunday mornings, whispered promises in the dark, and a profound, bone-deep familiarity that comes only from years of shared history. Their history included a wedding. A grand, unforgettable affair at a historic manor in upstate New York 5 years prior. The kind of day you build your future on. One Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after their 5th wedding anniversary, an anniversary they had celebrated with a quiet dinner and renewed vows in their hearts, Eleanor woke up to find Thomas already gone for an early site meeting. She walked into their master bathroom, and that's when the first fissure appeared in her reality. She was looking for a specific photograph, a framed print of their wedding day that usually sat on the shelf next to their antique medicine cabinet. It wasn't there. A small detail, easily overlooked, right? Maybe Thomas had moved it to clean. But as Eleanor surveyed the room, a creeping sense of dread began to coil in her stomach. The shelf was dusted, yes, but the faint, perfectly rectangular shadow of the frame wasn't visible on the wall, as it should have been. It was as if no picture had ever sat there. Eleanor dismissed it, telling herself her meticulous archivist's mind was overanalyzing. Then, she moved to the living room. Their grand, framed wedding photo, the one above the mantelpiece, where they stood beneath a canopy of wisteria, their faces radiant with a joy only captured once, was also missing. In its place was a landscape print, an unremarkable watercolor of a coastal scene. It was a nice print, but one Eleanor had never seen before. Panic began to claw at her throat. She ran to her office, to the meticulously organized digital archives on her laptop. She searched wedding photos, Thomas and Eleanor, August 14, 2020. Nothing. The files were gone. Not deleted, but as if they had never existed. Eleanor waited, heart pounding, for Thomas to return, her mind cycling through rational explanations. A colossal, malicious hack, a bizarre, shared hallucination. But when Thomas finally walked through the door, his usual warmth was replaced by something subtly different. He kissed her on the forehead, asked about her day, and when she finally blurted out, "Thomas, where are the wedding pictures? Where's our wedding?" his response was a gentle, utterly bewildered frown. "Ellie, what are you talking about?" he asked, his voice soft, but his eyes holding a blank incomprehension that chilled her to the bone. "We're not married. We've talked about it, certainly, but we haven't done it yet." "That's a conversation for another time, isn't it?" Eleanor felt the room tilt. Her meticulous, fact-based world had just dissolved. The man she loved, the man who had recited sacred vows to her 5 years ago, was denying the very foundation of their life. He was not lying. The terror was that he genuinely seemed to believe it. He believed they were merely cohabiting partners of 7 years, not a married couple of 5. He remembered their first date, their first kiss, the move to the brownstone, everything but the one, single, central event that had redefined their relationship. Her wedding had been erased from history, and the man she loved had no memory of being the groom. This wasn't just a missing photo, this was a missing chapter of life. The unsettling truth was starting to dawn. Perhaps the only person who remembered that day was Eleanor herself. And that, dear viewers, is where our story begins to truly unravel. The initial shock gave way to a cold, razor-sharp certainty in Eleanor's mind. She was not insane. But if she wasn't insane, then the world itself had gone mad. Her reality was a stage set with an impossible, terrifying lie, and Thomas, the man she had promised forever to, was now an unwitting participant in a conspiracy against her own memory. Eleanor had to move in secret. She couldn't show Thomas the depth of her panic. The fear was that if she pushed too hard, he would either call a doctor or leave, completing the erasure. Her work as an archivist became her shield and her weapon. She knew how to dig, how to find the almost invisible threads that connected disparate pieces of information. The first clue was subtle, almost a ghost. While discreetly searching their financial records, she found a series of large, unexplained transactions from 5 years ago. They weren't withdrawals for a wedding, but deposits. Large, round figures that went into Thomas's separate savings account, an account he rarely touched. These weren't savings, they looked like a reimbursement. But for what? The dates lined up perfectly with the time their wedding would have been planned. Next, Eleanor searched for the venue, the Hawthorne Manor. A quick online search confirmed it was a real, historic estate. She called, pretending to be a former guest inquiring about a distant relative's wedding that had supposedly taken place there 5 years ago. The manager, a kindly-sounding older woman, checked her meticulously kept ledger. August 14, 2020, the manager confirmed, was booked for a corporate retreat, dear. The Sterling Group. Nothing remotely resembling a wedding. Eleanor hung up, her hand trembling. A wedding venue, a place she remembered down to the very pattern on the antique china, had been scrubbed clean and replaced with a mundane corporate event. Someone hadn't just removed her wedding, they had replaced it. The strain began to show in their relationship. Thomas, sensing her distraction and the nervous energy radiating off her, grew concerned. He started suggesting weekend trips, date nights, all attempts to reconnect with the woman he thought he knew. His affection, once a source of comfort, now felt like an elaborate, agonizing performance. One evening, as he held her hand, Eleanor noticed a faint, jagged white line just above his left wrist. A scar she had never seen before. "Thomas," she asked, trying to sound casual, "what's this?" He looked down at it, a flicker of something she couldn't identify, a shadow of confusion, perhaps even fear, crossing his face before he smiled. "Oh, that? Just a silly accident. Fell off a ladder painting the attic a few months ago. You were away at that library conference, remember?" But Eleanor did remember. She remembered painting that attic together, for years ago, and she remembered the wedding ring she had personally placed on that hand. The subtle lie, the seamless rewriting of a minor event, sent a cold spike of fear through her. The Thomas she loved was still there, but he was wearing a meticulously crafted mask, woven from manipulated memories. The next pivotal moment came from an unexpected source. Anya, Eleanor's only close friend, a freelance investigative journalist whose cynicism was only matched by her loyalty. Anya, a whirlwind of vibrant red hair and uncompromising intensity, was Eleanor's last lifeline. When Eleanor nervously recounted the impossible story, Anya's first reaction wasn't doubt, but a journalist's curiosity. She promised to look into the Sterling Group corporate retreat. Anya's findings were the first substantial crack in the fortress of the lie. The Sterling Group was a real company, but the list of attendees for that supposed retreat was highly unusual. They were all employees of a little-known, highly secretive psychological research firm based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, called Kronos Dynamics. Even more disturbing, Thomas's name was listed on the retreat's manifest, not as an attendee, but as a design consultant. A landscape architect working with a psychological research firm? The pieces didn't fit. Eleanor's despair deepened, transforming into a desperate, focused rage. Thomas wasn't just a victim of this erasure. He was, in some capacity, involved in the lie that was consuming her. She was trapped in a home built on an illusion, sleeping next to a man who might be her jailer. She had to know what Thomas was hiding, what his involvement was with Kronos Dynamics. One late night, While Thomas was deep in a sleep that seemed suspiciously heavy, Eleanor took the drastic, heartbreaking step of searching his home office. She bypassed his security with the knowledge gained from years of shared passwords and trust. What she found wasn't a smoking gun, but a small, silver key hidden inside an antique drafting compass. A key that looked like it belonged to a lockbox or maybe a locker. Her heart hammered the rhythm of impending doom. This key wasn't to a lockbox, it was to the next stage of her terrifying journey. The silver key became Eleanor's obsession. Following a deep dive into Thomas's digital calendar, a calendar that, chillingly, showed no record of their alleged 5 years of marriage, Eleanor found a single recurring appointment: Storage Unit 44, Chelsea Piers. It was a weekly maintenance check, blandly disguised. This was the lock. This was where the truth was being stored, locked away from the world and from Thomas's own mind. Eleanor knew she couldn't trust Thomas or the system that had enveloped him. She went alone, guided by a desperation that outweighed her fear. Chelsea Piers, in the pale, cold light of an early Saturday morning, felt like the edge of the world. Storage Unit 44 was tucked away in a dimly lit, rarely visited corridor. The silver key slid into the heavy padlock with a sickening click. Inside, the unit wasn't filled with dusty furniture or forgotten possessions. It was a meticulously organized archive, her archive. Boxes upon boxes were labeled in Thomas's neat, familiar handwriting: Eleanor, mementos pre-2020, correspondence, unmodified, and, most devastatingly, a large box marked simply, the wedding. Eleanor tore open the box. Inside was a treasure trove of her lost reality: the original embossed invitations, her mother's lace handkerchief, the something old, and a hard drive. She connected the drive to her phone, and there they were, hundreds of photos and videos. Her wedding. Her white dress, the wisteria canopy, the vows, Thomas's tear-streaked face. It was real. She wasn't crazy. But the chilling truth was, Thomas had been actively hiding the evidence of their marriage from himself. The drive also contained something else: a long, rambling, time-stamped video file labeled Thomas, pre-Protocol 18. With shaking hands, Eleanor played it. The Thomas on the screen was 5 years younger, thinner, and utterly broken. He looked directly into the camera, his eyes burning with an unbearable grief. He began to speak, his voice choked with emotion, revealing the terrifying, unthinkable truth. Kronos Dynamics wasn't a research firm. It was a black site operation specializing in cognitive recalibration, a horrifyingly precise form of targeted memory manipulation. Their target: Thomas. 5 years ago, Thomas, an idealistic and fiercely principled landscape architect, had stumbled upon a horrifying truth about one of his largest clients, a multi-billion-dollar real estate magnate named Malcolm Thorne, who was secretly financing a global network of illegal, environmentally devastating mining operations. Thomas had documentation, photos, ledgers, enough to ruin Thorne. Thorne didn't kill Thomas. Killing him would turn him into a martyr and reveal the evidence. Instead, Thorne used his deep connections to Kronos Dynamics. The company offered an insidious solution: erase the threat by erasing the memory that created it. They identified Thomas's greatest weakness: his profound, all-consuming love for Eleanor. They threatened to make Eleanor disappear permanently unless Thomas voluntarily underwent the Protocol 18 treatment, a process that would erase the most complex, most deeply rooted memory of the last 5 years: their marriage. The video Thomas was recording was his final farewell to his true self. He explained that the cost of saving Eleanor's life was sacrificing their life together. He chose to erase the happiest, most vulnerable part of himself, knowing that his mind would create a plausible, unmarried relationship to fill the gap. The scar on his wrist wasn't from a ladder, it was from a surgical incision made during the memory procedure. The deposits in his bank account were Thorne's payoff to Kronos, disguised as a consultant fee for Thomas, designed to keep him financially stable and compliant. Thomas had become a living ghost, his love story meticulously archived by himself, hidden from the man he had become. As the video ended, A wave of despair washed over Eleanor, quickly replaced by a fierce, protective rage. She wasn't fighting for a forgotten wedding. She was fighting for the soul of the man she loved, a man who had sacrificed his own identity to save her. Suddenly, the steel door of storage Unit 44 groaned open. Standing silhouetted in the doorway was a man, tall and menacing, his face devoid of emotion. Behind him, Eleanor could see the unmistakable figure of Thomas, his eyes wide, his expression a mask of confusion and betrayal. The menacing man, a Kronos operative, stepped forward, his voice a low, gravelly threat. "Eleanor Vance. The protocol is compromised. We're bringing you in for evaluation." Thomas, his memory still fractured, was being used as bait, and the confrontation had just begun. The Kronos operative, a formidable man named Hale, moved with a cold, professional efficiency. Eleanor's mind, the archivist's mind, snapped into survival mode. She knew Hale wasn't there to talk. He was there to complete the erasure. The final, terrifying act in this tragic play. "Thomas," Eleanor pleaded, keeping her eyes on Hale, but directing her voice to the man she loved. "I know about the storage unit. I know about Protocol 18. You did this to save me." Thomas flinched. The look in his eyes wasn't recognition, but a deeper, more profound confusion. The sound of their shared history, of a love he no longer remembered, was momentarily fracturing the facade of his manufactured reality. Hale, sensing the break in the conditioning, moved to subdue Eleanor. In a split second of desperate inspiration, Eleanor grabbed the hard drive from the wedding box and slammed it against the wall, shattering the casing and scattering the internal magnetic discs across the floor. "The evidence is gone," she lied, knowing she had already backed up the files through her archivist's network. But the truth is in his head. This momentary distraction was all she needed. Hale hesitated, his primary mission now compromised. Eleanor used the opportunity to shove a heavy, wheeled shelving unit towards him, creating a momentary barrier. She then lunged past Thomas, bursting out of the storage unit and into the complex maze of the piers. The pursuit was short and brutal. Eleanor led Hale on a desperate chase, but he was faster, more trained. Just as Hale cornered her near the water's edge, a sudden, blinding flash of movement intervened. "Thomas." Something in Eleanor's desperate plea, something in the sight of her in danger, had momentarily broken through the deep-seated psychological block. Not a full memory, but a torrent of raw, unedited emotion. He didn't remember the wedding, but he remembered the depth of his love for her. Driven by an ancient, protective instinct that transcended memory, Thomas tackled Hale, slamming the operative against the railing. The fight between the two men was quick. Thomas, fueled by a primal need, managed to subdue Hale long enough for Eleanor to grab a discarded piece of metal piping. She delivered a sharp, decisive blow to Hale's head, knocking him unconscious. They didn't call the police. Thomas, standing over the unconscious operative, was visibly shaking, his face a landscape of psychological turmoil. "Ellie," he whispered, using the old nickname. I don't know who I am." The truth was fighting its way through the artificially constructed walls of his mind. The aftermath: Eleanor and Thomas disappeared. They didn't go to Thorne or the authorities. The threat of Kronos dynamics was too pervasive, the manipulation too sophisticated. Instead, they chose a life of deliberate, anonymous rebuilding. They moved to a remote, quiet town in the Pacific Northwest, Eleanor using her connections to create new, verifiable identities. The wedding, the actual ceremony, remained erased from Thomas's conscious mind. The Protocol 18 was too effective, too insidious to be reversed without catastrophic psychological damage. But a different kind of truth emerged. Eleanor, using the archived wedding video and photos, began to rebuild their foundation, not by forcing him to remember, but by showing him who they were. They started a new life, a new courtship, built on shared secrets and an unbreakable, tested loyalty. Their final act of defiance was subtle but profound. Eleanor, under her new identity, published an anonymous, heavily fictionalized account of cognitive recalibration on an obscure academic blog, using the non-specific details she had gleaned from the storage unit. It was a single, tiny stone thrown into a vast, murky pool, but it was a start. The truth about Malcolm Thorne and Chronos dynamics was now documented, hidden in plain sight within the academic noise, waiting for the right archivist to find it. Eleanor and Thomas are now simply a couple. They are not legally married, that paperwork remains lost to the system, but they are bound by a vow far stronger, the promise of a man who sacrificed his own happiness to save the woman he loved, and the devotion of a woman who fought history itself to save her husband's soul. She woke up to find her wedding erased from history, but she chose to write a better ending, one day, one moment at a time. The echoes of the past will always be there, a faint, beautiful ache in Thomas's eyes, a reminder of the sacrifice. But they face the future together, two souls irrevocably linked by a tragedy that only they truly understand. A story this complex, this layered, about the price of love and the power of memory, deserves to be heard. If Eleanor's fight against the forces of erasure resonated with you, if the sheer audacity of this secret kept you on the edge of your seat, you know what to do. Like this video, subscribe to Family Secrets Unveiled so you don't miss our next deep dive into the hidden truths, and make sure that notification bell is on. Trust me, the secrets we uncover next will be just as shocking.